Schneider believes that symbol is something that stands for something else. So before getting into Schneider's topic, I'll quickly revise what we have done in the previous class. We have Victor Turner, we have Clifford Gibbs. Basically, symbolic anthropology tries to understand the culture through symbols. What is symbol? Symbol can be tangible, intangible, it can be idea, it can be thought. So, symbol is a sign. What is sign? Sign has got signifier and signified. So signifier means it has got some shape or form or image. Signified means it has got some meaning. That is sign. And what is symbol? Symbol is a sign which is culturally shared. Okay, so a sign, if it is used in a culture, because only people from that culture can understand that meaning. I told you the example of Indian flag. Indian flag, for us, it is something sacred. We treat it with utmost respect because we all have attached some meaning to it and we all shared it. But you go and take it to somewhere in Andaman Islands and show them the flag. Does it make any sense to them? No. So symbols are something which has been shared among a group and is limited to that culture. Okay, so they want to study the culture through these symbols. Now there are two types. One is interpretative and other is symbolic. Now Victor Turner is influenced by structural functionalists. Structural functionalists will try to understand how the cohesion, stability and solidarity is maintained in a society. So now he is also trying to do the same because he is influenced by them. But he is trying to understand that cohesion, solidarity and the stability through symbols. So he focused on symbols called as rituals. So through the rituals, he tried to understand how the stability and solidarity is maintained. We have seen liminality, anti-structure, and how that anti-structure is enabling the continuation of the structure. Correct. So this is what he is trying to do. And whereas Clifford Gibbs, he is trying to just tell you in detail. So whatever he is noticing, he will take an event. Suppose we have studied the cockfight of Balinese. Okay, in Bali, the cockfights will happen. So he took the cockfight event and he said, okay, two cocks are fighting. And when these two cocks are fighting, it's not just the cocks are participating in the fight, but the groups of people are participating and their ego, at the same time, they are trying to show their masculinity to that through the fight. At the same time, they are trying to show that whoever loses is losing their status, whoever wins is winning their status. Okay, he is trying to tell things in detail. Now, his approach is that first he will ask them, what are you thinking about it? What is your view? How you are considering this event? So they'll all be giving their interpretations. Then he will make his own interpretation from those and he will try to give you what is present in the event. So event, he is studying event not just for the sake of event, but he is studying event to explain the culture through it. Okay, so these are the two things we have studied previously. So he has used what approach? Hermeneutics. Hermeneutics means the Greek god, when he said something, it's not understood by the people. So you are trying to read it and explain it to the people, outsiders. Similar way, here Clifford Geertz considers culture as a text. So culture is nothing but combination of symbols. All the symbols, see, ideas, beliefs, thoughts, everything, if you combine, it will become culture, right? So everything is made of symbols. So it's a combination of symbols, and these symbols are just known to the people belonging to that particular native community, not the outsiders. So now every symbol has got some meaning, and now the anthropologist, what he'll do, he'll read that symbol, he'll know the meaning of that culture, and now he will interpret and tell it to the other people. So this approach is called as hermeneutics approach, just because in the Greek their God says something which people don't understand, it is explained. In the similar manner, Clifford Geertz also says the same. Now coming to Schneider, just note down quickly. According to Schneider, culture is a system of symbols. Culture is a system of symbols, and symbol is something that stands for something else. So culture is a system of symbols, and symbol is something which stands for something else. So it looks like something, but the representation and what it represents is not the same. Okay, so what is the appearance and what is it representing? It's not the same. It is different. So symbol is something which stands for something else. Now it looks like a material, but it is representing what? It is representing a pen which can help you write, right? So a material and something which it is representing is different. So he believes that the representation and what it represents is different. Okay, so next continue. There is no relationship. There is no relationship between representation. There is no relationship between representation and what it represents. No relationship between representation and what it represents. Since full stop, since symbols and its meaning, since symbols and its meaning are arbitrary social construct, since symbols and its meaning are arbitrary social construct, comma, the existence of the existence the comma the existence of a symbol in one community, the existence of a symbol in one community doesn't ensure the existence of a symbol in one community doesn't ensure that that it will be recognized on other or recognized by other. Next paragraph. Schneider Schneider is not interested. Schneider is not interested in decoding. Schneider is not interested in decoding individual symbols. Schneider is not interested in decoding individual symbols. He argues that symbols constitute an autonomous system. Symbols constitute an autonomous system. Within this system, certain symbols are central points of orientation. Symbols constitute an autonomous system, and within this system, certain symbols are central points of orientation around which all else depends. Central points of orientation around which all else depends. These symbols, these symbols are called as core symbols. These symbols are called as core symbols. Okay, so what did you understand? He is not interested in decoding what individual symbol is meaning to them. Rather, he feels that it symbols constitute an autonomous system within the culture, and within that there is central point of orientation around which all other symbols depend upon, which he calls as core symbols. So he is taking symbols as an autonomous system around a central axis. All other symbols depends in this system, and this is called as core symbols. So he studies kinship in his book A Critic of the Study of Kinship. So Schneider, he belongs to America, so he observed American kinship system. So in America, what do you observe in terms of kinship? What is kinship? Kinship is nothing but the relationship between the kins. Who are kins? Kins are those people either related by blood or marriage, right? So that is the kinship. Kinship means relationship between the kins, and what is the relationship? Either related by blood or marriage. That is the kinship. So now later on other third version is added, that is socially related also. Okay, so you adapt a child. So though they are not related by blood and marriage, still they become your kin because you are socially adapted. So how is this system in America? So you might have noticed through the news or people whom you relate personally, how are things present in US? Just think of it and try to express what you understand about their kinship system. Rakshit, I think you might be having some people in US who are related. So what is their kind of kinship system there? They individually live after an adulthood. Okay, but the relationship is based on what? Is it, how is the relationship mostly based upon? So American culture system encompasses two great orders. One is order of nature and other is order of law. So nature, order of nature and order of law. So nature means order of, see, using these two orders, he tries to give three types, which depends upon order of nature alone. That means the child can be illegitimate. So that means who is born out of the sexual relation but not related by marriage. Then out of the law alone. So law alone means adopted child. He is not naturally involved. There are two orders. One is order of nature and other is order of law. Order of nature means where you biologically produce a child. Order of law means you adopt a child. where only law is involved, because here you are not biologically producing it. So it's not the order of nature, it's order of law alone. In other case, it's order of nature alone that need not be accepted by the people. People may not accept them as a child or take care of him or whatever it is. So third is the combination of these two, the kin of nature, the kin of law, and the kin of nature and law. That means child created through marriage. Third category of kin was considered to be the truest relatives for Americans. So the first two, there they don't consider it to be the truest form of kins, but only the third one, the combination of the nature and law, they consider to be the truest form of kins. But in many other tribal societies, it is not the same. Many indigenous societies, it is not the same. Even in India, adopted child is treated as a child. Their kin's relationship is mostly based upon combination of nature and law. So you can write down study of kinship, subheading, you give the study of kinship. In his book, in his book, A Critic of Study of Kinship, in his book, A Critic of Study of Kinship, Schneider examined Schneider examined kinship as a cultural system. Schneider examined kinship as a cultural system. This form of analysis is called as culturalist approach. This form of analysis is called as culturalist approach. Full stop. Culturalist approach. Next point. Schneider criticized his predecessors. Schneider criticized his predecessors for their limited and narrow understanding of kinship. So he criticized the predecessors for their limited and narrow understanding of kinship. He argued that blood and related symbols, he argued that blood and related symbols like he argued that blood and related symbols, blood, blood, blood and related symbols like marriage was core symbol of kinship, was core symbol of kinship in US, like marriage. That is related symbols like marriage was core symbol of kinship in US. Kin solidarity was derived from two sources. Schneider criticized his predecessors for their limited and narrow understanding of kinship. He argued that blood and related symbols like marriage was a core symbol of kinship in US. Next, kin solidarity was derived from two sources. One, relationship as a natural substance, that is blood. Two sources. One, relationship as a natural substance. Next, relationship as a code of conduct. That is law. So he says that if you look at American cultural system, it encompasses two great orders. One is order of nature. From this, he says that American cultural system encompasses two great orders. One is order of nature, order of law, giving rise to three classes. These two great orders will give rise to three classes of kings. American cultural system encompasses two great orders through which they construct the kinship. Two great orders through which they construct the kinship. One is order of nature, other is order of law. These two orders will produce three classes of kings, American kings. Okay. So these two will be three types of kings. What are the three types? Kin of nature alone. One is three classes of kings you have written, right? Two orders will produce three classes of American kings. One is kin of nature alone. That is biological or illegitimate child. Three classes of American kings. One is kin of nature alone or kin in nature alone. That is biological illegitimate child. Then kin in law alone. Kin in nature alone, biological illegitimate child. Kin in law alone is adopted child, and kin in nature and law is child created through marriage. Nature and law. Right? So third category of kin third category of kin was considered to be truest relatives. Third category of kin was considered to be truest relatives for Americans. Love is the symbol of American kinship. Next point. Love is the symbol of American kinship and is reflected through love is the symbol of American kinship and is reflected through sexual intercourse and blood relations. Sexual intercourse and blood relations. So, what he is trying to say through this, see, first, his way of looking at symbols is different. He is not interested in decoding individual symbols. Rather, he looks symbols as a system, autonomous system within the culture, and he will take that system, he will understand it. So that is his categorical or taxonomical approach. Okay. So, and he has done one important study that is about kinship. So in kinship, what he has observed is that in American kinship, he was critic to the previous studies. So I'll explain you how he is critiquing them. Okay. But in that, what he has observed is in American kinship, he has observed the order of nature, order of law, and this giving rise to three classes of kins: kin by order alone, nature alone, and kin by blood, sorry, kin by law alone, and both kin by blood and law, or nature and law. So, which he calls as the children who are created through the marriage has been considered to be the truest. So, the third category forms the truest relatives for American kins. Okay, this is what he has said. Now he says that the predecessors, that means the previous people who have studied kinship, whoever went to other areas to study indigenous people, okay, the tribal people or the indigenous people, where they went, they looked at kinship in terms of procreation alone. So he has studied Yap society of Micronesia. So here the father is decided by order of doing, not by order of being. That means here the biological relationship doesn't determine the parental aspect or the kin. So here the father is not decided by order of being. That means if father is able to fulfill his actions, then only he'll be called as father, or else they have all the rights to renounce. So they can cancel the fatherhood if the father is not able to fulfill those responsibilities. Okay. So for the children, the relationship with their parents in this, for the father, depends upon what father does to them. So through this, what is trying to explain, he has freed the kinship from his biological constraints. So the kinship is not just dependent upon the biological constraints alone, and he has opened the doors for new forms of relationship. It can be created by actions. So new forms of relationships can be created by actions. So which today can be linked to the homosexual relationship. It's not by the biological relations alone, biological constraints alone, but it is based on the actions done, right? So how they are related to each other through their actions. So this is the understanding of kinship by Schneider. His contribution and his way of looking at symbols is different. He tries to look at symbols as a system, and there are core symbols around which all other symbols depends upon. So in this kinship, what are the core symbols? Marriage and blood, which he calls as core symbols. Okay. Then you have the criticism to the Schneider. So the symbols and meanings can be misinterpreted, and therefore it is impossible to generalize the beliefs of one culture today. Okay. So this is one of the criticism, and then you can conclude. So this is with respect to the taxonomical approach of Schneider. Right. Then we have cognitive anthropology. So now cognitive anthropology cognitive anthropology, if you look at, it deals with the people thought process. Cognitive, from the word itself you can understand. So now I just want to ask you one thing, that there is a theory known as theory of mind. Have you heard of it? Theory of mind? Anytime, theory of mind. This is not related to the syllabus, but it's related to the cognitive anthropology, definitely. So here, what do you focus upon first? Cognitive means thinking, right? So they are interested in the thought process. Now, what they are interested here is that first is what people do. They will categorize things. So we will call it furniture, we'll call electronics, we'll call the subjects, right? So we are habituated to categorize things. And what do we do to categorize things? We use language. So now what they are doing is, in this cognitive anthropology, they consider the Sapir-Whorf's hypothesis, which we are going to learn in Unit 7 of language. Sapir-Whorf. Sapir is one person, Edward Sapir, and Benjamin Whorf. So, what they have given is that language influences thought process. Because if you go to some countries, in those countries, you don't have this gender differentiation of he and she. So when you don't have gender terms such as he and she, then there is no classification of, or no differentiation. Whatever the inequality that you notice in terms of gender, then you don't observe. There are no words of inequality over there, which mistreats any other gender. So, like these, through examples, they have highlighted that language influences thought, and language help you categorize things. So you will categorize things using language, and this categorization influences the thought process. So now they are trying to understand how the people think through this categorization of language. So now they'll use language and they'll see how people are categorizing, and through that they'll understand their thought process. How the native is thinking. So they do study ethnoscience. Ethnoscience means which focuses on the study of the native person. Okay, see, you have a group, and in that group they have their own style of working. And now if you have to understand, suppose somebody have to understand UPSC, they should understand what a person thinking in this sector, or else it's not going to give the true meaning. So in the similar manner, there is some community. If you have to understand what they are thinking, should understand how the native of that particular community is thinking. So now coming to theory of mind. So you have understood what these people are interested in, right? So these people are interested in understanding a group, how they are thinking and what is their thought process, how they are categorizing their life, how they are making things into categories. Okay. Now theory of mind is something. Have you ever thought that maybe during your childhood or somewhere you are in tender ages, you have committed some wrong and you went home, then what is going on in your mind? What is going in your mind? So your father or your mother comes, you have committed some wrong and you went there. What you would be thinking about it? Now your parents get to know about it, what wrong you have committed, maybe some mischief activity you have committed at school, you went home. and then your parents got to know it. Now, what you will be thinking? You will be constantly thinking that, so now my parent is going to act in so and so way, right? What you are doing? You are getting into the minds of the other people and predict what they are going to think. Theory of mind says that entering into the other's mind to understand their perspective and their way of thinking. Now, first, generally you'll see, like, have you seen a movie Upiri? Right? So you have a painting which is sold, right? So in the movie, like Nagarjuna gives a painting to Prakash Raj, which is done by Karthik. So he gives it to him, and what Prakash Raj does is he tries to understand the painter's perspective. He gets into the mind of painters and he'll try to understand the painter's perspective. So showing, if somebody shows you a painting, by looking at, you won't understand anything. Then what you will do, you will try to understand by getting into the mind of that person and see his perspective. So this is nothing but the theory of mind. So theory of mind is getting into the other's mind to understand their perspective, what they are going to do or what they are going to think. So linguistics help us in doing or understanding how people categorize, and through that we'll understand how they think. In a simple manner, if we have to say, culture is nothing but whatever the culture you are saying, it is a mental model. Culture is a set of mental models. The aim is to duplicate the mental models using the theory of mind, linguistic analysis, and the replication of the classification system. Now, what you will do, you will use the language, you will use this linguistic classification, and you will try to duplicate what is there in the mind. So, you will tell that, see, if you are categorizing into these three things, that means in your mind you have categorized into these three things. There is in Hopi Red Indians, in Hopi Indians, what happens is that they won't have this past, present, or future differentiation. They don't have the past, present, and future like we do. Are you getting my point? Now we are understanding their classification through their language. When there is no past, present, and future, then their thought process, their mental models also we can understand how they think. So what is their thought process? So the cognitive anthropology tries to understand this thought process by using this classification systems. Just note down. According to cognitive anthropology, culture is a set of mental models. Culture is a set of mental models, and the job of the ethnographer is to duplicate, and the job of the ethnographer is to duplicate the features of these cognitive models. The job of the ethnographer is to duplicate the features of this cognitive models so that they could think like a native. So that they could think like a native. And next point, and this ethnographic model, let me repeat from the beginning. According to cognitive anthropology, culture is a set of mental models, and the job of the ethnographer is to duplicate the features of these cognitive models so that they could think like a native, and full stop. an ethnographer model, an ethnographer model was presumed correct. An ethnographer model was presumed correct if it allowed, presumed, presumed correct, it is considered correct if it allowed him to duplicate the way natives categorize a phenomenon. See, the ethnographer will create a duplication, and the ethnographer model is considered correct or presumed correct if it if it allowed him to replicate the way, if it allowed him to replicate the way a native categorizes a phenomenon. So if you are able to replicate how the native is thinking, then that is correct, or else it is not. Let me repeat, an ethnographic model was presumed correct if it allowed him to replicate the way a native categorizes a phenomenon. So if you can replicate what native is thinking, then your model is correct, or else it's not. Okay, so the aim of anthropologist is to reproduce, the aim of anthropologist is to reproduce the cultural reality. The aim of anthropologist is to reproduce the cultural reality as it is perceived, as it is perceived or lived by the natives. Perceived or lived by the natives. Next, write theory of mind. Theory of mind. It is a fundamental cognitive capacity. It is a fundamental cognitive capacity that enables individual to predict and explain the behavior of others. Right? Predict and explain the behavior of others in social interactions effectively. In social interactions effectively. So using theory of mind, one can go beyond. Using theory of mind, one can go beyond surfacial behavior. Surface behavior of the person. One can go beyond surface behavior of a person in order to see a host of invisible mental states. Because, next point, because none has or no one has direct access to another person's mind. Because no one has direct access to another person's mind, it relied heavily on the linguistics. Because no one has access to another person's mind, it relied heavily on linguistics and its analysis to understand the cognitive process. It relied heavily on linguistics. Right? So they were impressed by Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Next, write down. Cognitive anthropologist. You can just use CA. Cognitive anthropologist was impressed by Sapir-Whorf hypothesis for linguistic analysis. For linguistic analysis, this hypothesis argues that write down Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Cognitive anthropologist was inspired by Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Sapir-Whorf hypothesis for linguistic analysis, because nobody has access to other person's mind. They depended upon the linguistic analysis. In the linguistic analysis, they use this. They were impressed by Sapir-Whorf hypothesis for linguistic analysis, and this hypothesis argues that language is a force in itself. This hypothesis argues that language is a force in itself. It is not okay. Is a force in itself. Language is a force in itself. It is not just a means of communication. It is not just a means of communication, but also shapes. It is not just a means of communication, but also shapes people's perception. But also shapes people's perception of the world. Next point. World. Next. Cognitive scholars argued that replicating classification system of any language would give them the ability to think, cognitive scholars argued that replicating classification system of any language would give them the ability to think, in the same way as native speakers ability to think in the same way as a native speakers of that language. Next point, they aim to identify the native conceptual categories. They aim to identify the native conceptual categories, which they called as domain. They aim to identify the native conceptual categories, which they call as domains. So next point, domains are patterns of classification. Domains are patterns of classification of objects in a society. Domains are patterns of classification of objects in a society. Example, you can write the electronics, furniture, etc. So in furniture, what we have: chairs, table, sofa, everything, right? So it's a domain of classification of objects. So first, what they do, they aim to identify the native's conceptual category of which they call as domains. First, they'll understand the domain. Then they use, write down. Then they use a technique called. Then they use a technique called componential analysis. Then they use a technique called componential analysis. Technique called componential analysis to determine the definitive character, to determine the definitive character or the definitive characteristic by which they use a technique called componential analysis to determine the definitive characteristics by which objects, the definitive characteristics by which objects and ideas in each domain were sorted. Okay, so they'll use this componential analysis to understand how this sorting or how this domain formation is done based on certain characteristics. Okay, so people not just classify the objects but ideas also, right? So now what they say is that everywhere across the world, people have tendency to categorize. Okay, and but this categorization is culture specific. So that's why they call it new ethnography. New ethnography because they want to understand from the people's point of view, where the emic approach is emphasized, not the ethic approach. And ethnoscience is something which focuses on the native's point of view. Ethno means the group. Ethnic word comes from the group. So group, from that group's point of view, what is it talking about? So ethnoscience emphasizes on the group's point of view, or it's also called as new ethnography because the emphasis on the emic approach. Because here we are trying to understand what people are thinking and how they are categorizing. Of course, people everywhere in the world will categorize, but the categorization is not same everywhere. That is culture specific. Okay, just note down. They believe people tend to categorize. They believe people tend to categorize the outer world. People tend to categorize the outer world, and it is universal cognitive process. People tend to categorize outer world, and it is universal cognitive process. These categories are culture specific, or this categorization is culture specific. So then we have two people, Stephen Tyler and Harold Conklin. So these are the two people belonging to the cognitive anthropology. They try to explain this through their studies. So now Bhaskar try to explain what all we have studied so far. explain to them, not me. So just listen and try to find out what he is missing. Hmm. How do they replicate? How do they replicate that cognitive model? Using linguistic analysis. So who were they impressed by? Linguistic analysis. Through that they are trying to replicate. That linguistic analysis they are doing, and they are trying to replicate. And how did they get to it? And who were they impressed by? Sapir-Whorf, right? Sapir-Whorf, what did they say? Language is not just a means of communication, but it is how people perceive their world. How people are looking at their world can be understood through their language. That is what they have said. So, being impressed by this, they have used it. They have done the linguistic analysis. What they are saying, everywhere people will categorize, and which they call as a domain. The categorization of particular thing is domain, and this categorization is not the same thing everywhere. It's not done in the same way in all the areas. The categorization varies from place to place. In our culture, we'll categorize things differently. In other countries, they'll categorize things differently. So, what is the role of ethnographer? So, his role is to understand this categories classification and try to think like a native and replicate it. Okay, so that is what the cognitive anthropology tries to do. Simple, it basically tries to think like a native by understanding how the people are categorizing. So they use domains. These domains are nothing but categorizing. So the furniture is a domain, electronics is a domain, space is a domain. So like this, people classify things into domain, ideas into a domain. So you will understand why, on what basis this domain is categorized, and you'll think like a native. So just thinking like a native and able to tell what they are thinking is cognitive anthropology. That's it. So next we have Tyler, no doubt. Stephen Tyler, not E.B. Tyler, it's Stephen Tyler. So Tyler in his book Cognitive Anthropology, Tyler in his book Cognitive Anthropology criticized criticized his predecessors in anthropology. Tyler, in his book Cognitive Anthropology, criticized his predecessors in anthropology. He argued that, comma, he argued that previous scholars, he argued that previous scholars attempted, previous scholars attempted construct, previous scholars attempted to construct universal, to construct universal organizational ties, universal organizational ties, which were linked, which were linked, which were linked either by similar process of change, which were linked either by similar process of change, bracket, evolutionists or evolutionism, diffusionism. Repeating again, Tyler in his book Cognitive Anthropology criticized his predecessors in anthropology, comma, he argued that previous scholars attempted to construct universal organizational ties which were linked either by similar process of change, so similar processes of change, comma, bracket, evolutionism, diffusionism, bracket close, or by similarities of internal structure, or by similarities of internal structure, bracket, functionalists and structural functionalists and structuralists, functionalists, structural functionalists and structuralists. So what they have done, they have said there is universally internal same structure. Okay, so or see, in the book Cognitive Anthropology, he has criticized his predecessors. What they have done, they have said universal organizational ties either by process of change, similar process of change, or by similar internal structure. So by by considering the universal thing, they are trying to explain. So that is what he is trying to consider and criticize them. Okay, so one is either by similar process of change or similar internal structure. Then write down next, in order to achieve this goal, in order to achieve this goal, only certain kind of information was accepted as relevant. In order to achieve this, only certain kind of information was accepted as relevant. They did not take all the things to explain. They took only certain information in the theories. Only certain kind of information was accepted as relevant in order to achieve this goal. Next point. In contrast, next point, in contrast, cognitive anthropologists seeks or constitutes, cognitive anthropologists constitutes a new orientation, constitutes a new orientation, comma, it focuses on discovering, it focuses on discovering how different people, it focuses on discovering how different people organize, how different people organize and use their culture, how different people organize and use their culture. It is not, it is not a search, it is not a search of some generalized unit of behavior. It is not a search of some generalized unit of behavior. Okay, next. Every culture, every culture has a unique system of perceiving. Every culture has a unique system of perceiving and organizing. Every culture has a unique system of perceiving and organizing material phenomena. perceiving and organizing material phenomena, things, comma, things, events and emotions. Material phenomenon, comma, things, comma, events and emotions. The objective here, the objective here, next full stop, the objective here is not to study. The objective here is not to study the material phenomena, but the way these phenomena are organized. The objective here is not to study the material phenomena, but the way these material phenomena are organized in the minds of the people. The objective here is to study are organized in the minds of the people by the way these material phenomena are organized in the in the minds of the people. Next slide on. He conducted a field work. He conducted a field work among Koya. So you know Koya tribes of Andhra Pradesh, right? He conducted a field work among Koya and compared their point of view with the Americans. Compared their point of view with Americans. Americans, right on, Americans distinguish between hail, comma, distinguish between hail, comma, fog, hail, 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 comma, fog, comma, snow and dew. Snow and dew. But Koya called them as Manchu. But Koya called them as Manchu. They don't distinguish between all these things. They rather call it as Manchu. Even full stop, even if they can perceive, even even if they can perceive, even if they can perceive the difference between them, even if they can perceive the difference between them, these differences are not culturally significant to them. They can also perceive the differences between all these things. They can perceive the differences, but these differences are not culturally significant to them. In a similar manner, Koyas identify 7 types of bamboo. Similarly, Koyas can identify 7 types of bamboo on the basis of their strength, structure, thickness. In the similar manner, Koyas can identify 7 types of bamboo based on their strength, structure, thickness. Whereas Americans classify all of them as single word for it. So here through this study he tries to explain the way thought process is done and it varies culturally, right? So the people classify things according to the culture and that's what he was trying to say. So there he highlights the intracultural variations and intercultural variations also, rich, poor, old or young, men or women. So there is this interculture variation, that means different between two cultures, and intraculture, right, within the cultural variations also. He tries to say that through the other study, just note down, in American society, in American society, mother's brother's son, mother's brother's son, mother's brother's son, and mother's sister's son, mother's brother's son and mother's sister's son are called as cousins. Whereas Koyas distinguish between them. Whereas Koyas distinguish between them. Right? So the basic assumption of the Taylor, the basic assumption of the Taylor was that, basic assumption of the Taylor was that we classify, we classify because life in a world, life in a world where nothing was same, sorry, where nothing is same, life in a world where nothing is same, life in a world where nothing is same would become intolerable. If nothing is same, then everywhere you have to give different names, different way of looking at, then it becomes intolerable. There won't be any one single shop where you can get the particular category. You have to roam along. So it becomes intolerable. Comma, it is through naming and classification, it is through naming and classification, it is through naming and classification that the whole world of infinite variability, it is through naming and classification that the whole world of infinite variability is compressed, that the whole world of infinite variability is compressed to manage, sorry, compressed to manageable size and categories. Manageable size and categories, full stop. Next, however, the classification is arbitrary. However, the classification is arbitrary and varies from culture to culture. Next point. An anthropologist should not use his domain an anthropologist should not use his domain to understand natives, natives culture or explain natives culture. He should not use his domain to understand natives culture or to explain the natives culture. Okay, then you have Harold Conklin in the same theory. Again, he's influenced by Clark Whistler. Then he studies in University of California. And in 1946, during the World War II, right? World War II, when did it happen? 39 to 40. So during the World War II, he is in the Myanmar Philippines region. Okay. So in Philippines, he taught army personnels the Anthro and the Tagalog language. At that point of time, he taught the army personnels the anthropology and the Tagalog language. And in 1946, he studies Hanuno tribe. So there he notices, he conducts extensive field work. He writes what do you call 600 pages of Hanuno language in English. Converts 600 pages into English, and several Hanuno language words had no counterparts in English. He observes that there are no counterparts in English. So that means their classification and their way of cultural classification and English is not the same. And at the same time, he also does one work, ethnobotany. You can go through our blogs, Harold Conklin's way of looking at horticulture. So I have written a blog, so there you can study more about it. So he does study how people classify their plants and what are the different types of plants you have, the kind of practices that they do. So he has focused on classifying, and he has written more on these plants, and that's why his emphasis was on ethnobotany there. Ethnobotany study has been done. And he studied Hanunos, how they classify the colors. They classify the colors based on light, lightness, darkness, wetness, dryness. So there are only 4 types of colors among them. So we have many types. So we say primary colors, secondary colors, but there you notice only 4 types. So he tries to explain that the people's way of thinking can be understood through their classification or their categorization of things. So that's the work of Harold Conklin. This is with respect to cognitive anthropology, and you have certain criticisms that this new ethnography, the cognitive anthropology is also called as new ethnography, because here they are trying to understand how different people are thinking, not universal categorization, right? So universally they are not saying everything is same. They are just saying universally people will categorize, but it is culturally specific. Everywhere people will think in different way. So here they did not go beyond the analysis of this semantic domain. That means the language, they did not go beyond it, and they could not come up with anything substantive. And at the same time, there is no empirical evidence or empirical methods to find a proof to this what they are saying. So Keesing criticizes that they could not go beyond this semantic domain, and at the same time, how to find out what is there in the mind and studying culture through that. There is no universal agreement between the scholars. The way how you can study the culture by getting into the minds of the people. Okay, so they feel that even Stephen Tyler, we have seen, right? He himself got disillusioned with the cognitive movements. He argued that cognitive anthropology was and born to understand how the people think, but it has become too concerned with the one-dimensional analysis of language. So it is only taking language into consideration and to explain how the thought process is happening. But there are multiple processes which determine the thought process, right? If I have to say the contradiction to what Sapir-Whorf's theory that we'll be learning in Unit 7, what it says, language determines how people will perceive their world. It determines your thought process. But if I have to tell you, if people learn 10 languages, then which language is going to influence your thought process? Next, the scientists, if you look at the scientists, they talk about the magnetic flux. Is it influenced by language? The equations are not present in the language, or the magnetic flux, it's not there. So it's not one way, so that it faces criticism from others that the language alone does not influence the thought process. So thereby the critic is that it has become too considerate about the language and too much focused on it, and they did not take history into consideration or individual uh, cultures, whatever the culture that you are looking at, their history, how it is influencing the categorizational process, is not taken into consideration to explain how the things are classified. Okay, so here what you need to understand is that despite so many limitations, cognitive anthropology has introduced a new method and it has been utilized in various modern scientific projects such as artificial intelligence and neuroscience. Despite the limitations, its way of approach is utilized, right? What ChatGPT does, it is going to just think beyond what other person is going to think, right? So the large language models are designed on this, on the predictive nature. So this is with respect to cognitive anthropology. Then symbolic anthropology will do on Monday, and symbolic anthropology will finish in the first half hour, and then after that we'll go to 2.1 culture. Sorry, symbolic anthropology is already done. Postmodernism is left. We'll do in the first half hour of the Monday class, and after that we'll go to 2.1 culture. So you're done with your most complex part of your socio-cultural anthropology. So if you're clear with this, then you can easily deal with rest of the parts. It's very simple. Okay. So any doubts in cognitive anthropology? Very simple. First, their interest is not to find out universal rules. See, previously evolutionists or functionalists, what they have said, there is universal process, or they said universal structure. But here these people are not interested in making any generalization or universal things. Rather, they want to understand how individuals think differently in different cultures. Now, how do they understand? They understand it through the cognitive process. To understand that mental models, they have to replicate the mental models. In order to replicate the mental models, what they are influenced by? They are influenced by theory of mind. Okay, so to understand what is there in the people's mind, right? So they use the theory of mind, and in order to understand, they depended upon the linguistic analysis. You need some method, so they use linguistic analysis. They use the language, like classification of bamboo by Koya and classification of snow, dew, and everything differently. So both of them classify these two things differently. But here Americans, they call every type of bamboo as bamboo only. But Koya people, they classify it. Why? Because this is culturally relevant to them, and their snow, dew, fog, and that is culturally relevant to them. So people classify categories specific to their culture, and they have used this language for understanding. So this is nothing but ethno science, where you are understanding the native's point of view, right? So both the people have worked, Tyler and Conklin, they try to understand, and they have said that universally categorization happens, but it is culturally specific. And this has been found with certain limitations. This theory has been found with certain limitations, that you are overly dependent upon one-dimensional analysis. You did not go beyond the semantic domain. That means you did not go beyond the language. At the same time, you did not take history into consideration how this classification happens. Right. So this is with respect to cognitive anthropology. In the next class, we'll be looking at the postmodernism, and with this, our anthropological theories are done. Okay. Thank you.